Welcome to the Uncanny Valley podcast. Have you ever looked at something familiar, maybe a person, a place, even just an idea, and suddenly felt this really unsettling feeling?
Oh, yeah. That sense that it's almost right, but just off.
Exactly. That feeling,
Yeah.
that like psychological friction when something you know well shifts just enough to become properly strange, deeply foreign. That's really what we're diving into today.
Yeah, definitely. That peculiar sensation we often call the uncanny valley, right? It really pops up when our usual ways of seeing things get seriously challenged.
Yeah.
When something that should feel normal or relatable twists just enough to become, well, unsettling, maybe even a bit disturbing.
And, few stories really dig into this feeling with quite the same imaginative power or maybe sheer wit as the book we're tackling today.
Absolutely. We're talking about Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels.
Right. We're sort of embarking on a journey into one of literature's most famous, but maybe also most misunderstood works. A lot of people, they think of tiny people or huge giants.
Like a kid's story.
Exactly, like a whimsical children's tale. But actually, it's this masterful, sometimes pretty brutal look at perception, at scale,
Hmm.
and at that exact disorienting, uncanny feeling you get when our world or even ourselves are seen through a totally different lens, often a lens that's not very flattering.
Uh-huh.
We'll follow this guy, Lemuel Gulliver, who literally shrinks and grows, and by doing that, he ends up revealing some fascinating and sometimes, frankly, disturbing truths about humanity.
Swift's genius, I think, really lies in that simple idea of changing physical scale, making Gulliver huge in one place, tiny in another,
Yeah.
and using that as this incredibly powerful magnifying glass.
Yeah.
Or maybe like a reverse telescope. It's not just about being big or small physically.
No.
It's about the huge psychological impact.
Yeah.
Being totally out of proportion with everything around you,
Yeah.
how that just messes with your whole worldview,
Right.
and how it just lays bare all the absurd things, the hypocrisies in our own society. We're really going to unpack how Swift plays with scale to pull us and Gulliver right into that uncanny feeling.
Okay, so let's start by unpacking our main guy, Lemuel Gulliver. When you think of a great adventure, maybe you picture some, I don't know, swashbuckling hero, born noble, destined for great things.
Yeah, not Gulliver.
Not at all. His background is surprisingly, well, humble, almost deliberately normal. He's introduced as just a well-educated surgeon from Nottinghamshire, third of 5 sons. It doesn't exactly scream epic legend, does it?
No, it really doesn't. Just a regular person dealing with, as Swift puts it, a narrow fortune.
Mm-hmm.
His family didn't have a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
And that detail is actually pretty critical.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't have that inherent privilege, his traveling isn't some grand quest. It's practical, a necessity.
Right.
Even his education shows that practical side. He did 3 years at Emmanuel College, Cambridge, studied hard, but it seems like the family funds couldn't really stretch for a long academic path.
Okay.
So he shifted gears, became an apprentice for 4 years to a Mr. James Bates, who was apparently an eminent surgeon in London.
Mm.
So hands-on medical training.
But he didn't stop there, did he? He seemed pretty driven.
He really was. He took the initiative himself. He used these small sums from his father to learn navigation and mathematics. He was clearly thinking ahead, anticipating a life that involves sea travel.
Preparing for the unknown, you could say.
Exactly. Even though he couldn't possibly imagine how unknown it would get, he was basically tooling himself up for whatever might come.
So he's building this practical skill set, and after the apprenticeship...
So he goes for more medical studies, spends, 2 years and 7 months in Leiden, that's in the Netherlands, famous for its universities. And he specifically chose it for its utility in long voyages. Very focused.
Smart. And that paid off.
Pretty much straight away.
Hmm.
Soon after, he gets his first job at sea, surgeon on a ship called the Swallow, under Captain Abraham Pannell. He spends 3.5 years sailing to the Levant, other places. So you get this picture of a capable guy, diligent, seems pretty moral too, ready for a normal life.
And he tries for that normal life, doesn't he? Back in London.
Yeah, for a bit. He comes back from those first trips. He gets married to a Mrs. Mary Burton, who had a decent dowry. Seemed like he was all set for a standard, comfortable life.
Right.
But here's where we get that first really crucial glimpse into Gulliver's character. It's something that kind of ironically keeps pushing him back into these weird adventures he's trying to get away from.
What's that?
His London practice failed. And why? Because, in his own words, his conscience would not suffer me to imitate the bad practice of too many among my brethren.
Ah, so he was too honest. Too ethical.
Basically, yeah. This little detail, it seems minor, but it sets him up as this man of integrity, principled, almost to a fault, even if it means he struggles financially.
And that integrity, ironically, pushes him back to sea.
Exactly. His strong moral compass, rather than making things easy, keeps leading him to hardship, and then back to more voyages. He ends up as surgeon on 2 more ships, travels for 6 years to the East and West Indies, makes some money.
And he keeps learning, right? Reading languages.
Yeah, he uses his spare time well, reads a lot, and crucially for the story, gets really good at languages. He has a great facility for it, Swift says, by strength of memory.
Which turns out to be pretty essential later on.
Absolutely vital.
Mm-hmm.
For survival, for understanding these completely alien cultures he bumps into. Without that skill, the uncanny stuff he experiences would just be noise. Not just unsettling, but totally incomprehensible.
Okay, so that leads us to the big one, the voyage that kicks everything off.
Right. He's tired of the sea life, the risks, the uncertainty. He accepts what sounds like a good deal, an advantageous offer, as surgeon on the Antelope, sailing to the South Sea, the Pacific in May 1699.
Starts well, but then disaster.
Yeah, a huge storm hits, blows them way off course, northwest of Van Diemen's Land, that's Tasmania. The crew's already weak from hard work and bad food. Things get really bad.
And the ship hits a rock.
November 5th. Hits a rock, splits apart. Gulliver's one of just 6 who managed to get into a small boat.
But even that doesn't save them.
Nope. The boat gets overturned by a sudden flurry from the north. He's left swimming for his life, just going wherever fortune directed me, as he puts it.
Wow.
He finally makes it to shore, around 8 at night, totally exhausted, battered. He just collapses on the grass and sleeps for like 9 hours straight.
And when he wakes up?
When he wakes up, just around daylight,
Mm.
he's in this completely bizarre, terrifying situation. He can't move. He's tied down, strongly fastened to the ground. Arms, legs, even his long hair is pinned down with incredible precision.
This is it. The plunge into the uncanny really begins here.
Absolutely. And this leads us to something really clever about the book, something people maybe skip over sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
the way it's presented.
You mean the preface, the publisher?
Exactly. It's framed not as fantasy, but as a totally factual account. It's introduced by this guy, Richard Simpson, who's supposed to be Gulliver's ancient and intimate friend and the first publisher.
Right, and Simpson really goes overboard insisting it's all true.
He totally does. Says there's an air of truth apparent through the whole. So much so, he claims, that it became a saying among Gulliver's neighbors when anyone affirmed a thing to say it was as true as if Mr. Gulliver had spoken it.
Which is Swift's first little nudge into the uncanny, isn't it? It's this brilliant trick. It forces you, the reader, to sort of engage with this unbelievable story as if it's stone-cold fact.
Mm-hmm. And Simpson even talks about his editing choices. Says he cut out loads of boring stuff, innumerable passages relating to the winds and tides, technical details about sailing.
To make it more readable for everyone.
Right. To fit the work as much as possible to the general capacity of readers, which makes it sound like this practical, almost journalistic effort. But then the content is completely fantastical.
So that contrast makes the weird stuff seem even more real, more believable in a strange way.
Exactly. It makes the world Swift builds feel almost real, but just subtly, disturbingly off. It contributes directly to that uncanny feeling.
Swift is setting you up.
He absolutely is. He builds these worlds with such careful, logical, sometimes even boring detail that your brain kind of gets tricked into accepting them, even while your common sense is yelling, no way. It's a psychological game.
Lowering your guard before he hits you with the satire.
Precisely. And this connects to why the book has lasted so long, why it appeals on different levels. Thomas Balliet, an editor back in 1900, pointed out that even though it was published in 1726, and definitely not meant for kids.
It got picked up by children almost immediately.
Yeah. The book was soon appropriated by the children.
It's so true. I think most people, me included, probably read it first as a children's adventure. As a kid, you cannot comprehend the occasion which provoked the book, nor appreciate the satire, Balliet says.
Right.
But you just delight in the wonderful adventures. It's got that Robinson Crusoe survival thing mixed with like a fairy tale, straightforward adventure, really captivating.
But then for adults, or maybe just reading it again later, the interest is found chiefly in the keen satire which underlies the narrative.
So it works on 2 levels.
Completely. That's key to its genius and why it's still a classic. It's this amazing, imaginative adventure on the surface. Loads of cool, fantastical stuff. But underneath, it's this sharp, often pretty harsh, commentary on human society, politics, how we see things.
Swift himself hinted there was some hidden poison in it for grown-up readers.
He did. And what is that poison? Well, I think we're about to find out. As Gulliver's experiences force us and him to look at ourselves through a completely different, often quite humiliating lens.
And wow, what a lens. Stepping into Lilliput, our view just gets flipped upside down immediately. Gulliver wakes up, can't move, pinned to the ground. He hears this confused noise, then feels something alive moving on my left leg. Then it comes over my breast, nearly up to his chin. And what he finally sees, it's just mind-blowing.
Yeah.
A human creature, not 6 inches high, with a bow and arrow.
6 inches.
And then, to his total shock, at least 40 more of the same kind to follow. Just imagine that disconnect. Seeing something that looks human but is impossibly tiny. That's the uncanny hitting you right between the eyes.
His first reaction is pretty raw. Totally understandable, though. He roared so loud that they all ran back in a fright.
Scared them off.
Yeah. And he found out later somewhere actually hurt with the falls just leaping off his body. That's the first real moment of scale shock. He's massive, they're minuscule.
And he can't understand them.
No, their language just adds to the confusion. These shrill but clear cries. Hekina digo, tolgo fonak. Apparently that meant shoot arrows. Borak nivola, clear the way. Peplom salon, relax the chords. That immediate language barrier just highlights how completely other this place is. These tiny people look human, but sound alien.
But how they react to him, this giant... It's interesting, not just blind panic.
No, it's quite remarkable, actually.
Yeah.
It says a lot about their society. It's not just mindless hostility, which you might almost expect.
Right.
Instead, they go through this very methodical process. Subdue him, check him out. Their arrows just prick him like needles. Spears can't get through his leather jacket, his buff jerkin.
So they can't really hurt him much.
Not fatally. So they show this surprisingly prudent and generous call. They decide not to kill him. They subdue him, they bring him food and drink tiny portions, obviously, but it's nourishing. They even give him a sleepy potion in his wine so they can move him.
It shows they're organized, intelligent, maybe a bit ruthless.
Definitely organized.
Yeah.
And their ingenuity is amazing, given their size. Like, how do you feed this guy? That becomes the first big, almost funny logistical nightmare.
His appetite must be enormous from their perspective.
Totally. He's eating shoulders, legs, loins of meat smaller than the wings of a lark, but he's eating them 2 or 3 at a mouthful. He eats 3 loaves at a time, each about the size of a musket bullet. Drinks hogsheads of wine, each less than half a pint, but loads of them in one go.
Wow. Imagine the supply chain needed just to keep him fed.
It must have strained their entire system. Just feeding this one-man mountain forces their whole infrastructure to adapt, shows how much effort basic human needs take when the scale is flipped.
And then moving him, the engineering.
Oh, it's incredible. Almost unbelievable. They build their greatest engine. It's this wooden frame, 7 feet long, 4 feet wide, on 22 wheels.
It's like a tiny flatbed truck.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And getting him onto it, they use 80 poles, each a foot high. Strong cords, thick as pack thread, hooked onto bandages around his body. Then 900 of their strongest guys pull on pulleys.
900.
Yep. And they lift him and get him onto the engine in under 3 hours. All while he's out, cold from the potion. Even the journey to the capital, only half a mile, takes 1,500 of their tiny horses.
It really shows off their skill, their teamwork, a tiny society doing huge things.
It does. Which makes their later political squabbles seem even more ridiculous, actually.
So he gets to the capital. Where do they put him?
In an old temple. Apparently it was polluted by an unnatural murder sometime before, so it's disused. It has a gate 4 feet high so he can creep in.
And they chain him up.
By one leg. With 91 chains and 36 padlocks. It sounds harsh. From their point of view, it's necessary for security. I mean, look at his size.
He becomes an instant celebrity, right? A tourist attraction.
Absolutely. Over 100,000 people come just to look at him. At one point, an amazing 10,000 actually climbed up onto his body before the emperor issued a proclamation forbidding it, punishable by death.
Just imagine that, being climbed on by thousands of tiny people.
His very presence makes them rethink their world. The everyday becomes bizarre. And when he eventually manages to break the strings binding one arm and then gets mostly unchained, the noise and astonishment of the people at seeing me rise and walk are not to be expressed.
He's this living marvel, a spectacle, but also a constant reminder of how small they are.
Exactly. He could crush them by accident.
Yeah.
That shift in power where he's dominant just by existing, it sets the stage for how they start reacting later with more paranoia, more cruelty.
This new view, looking at their society through a magnifying glass, lets Swift really sharpen his satire, doesn't it? On government, customs.
Oh, totally. Take the emperor. He's described with this almost funny reverence. He's taller by almost the breadth of my nail than any of his court.
The breadth of a nail.
Right. He has majestic deportment, a shrill but very clear and articulate voice, and the courtiers' fancy clothes. From Gulliver's viewpoint, they look like an embroidered petticoat spread on the floor. It's grand, sure, but it's miniaturized in this grotesque way. Highlights how silly Pomp can look when you change the scale.
And the scene where they inventory his pockets, that's pure uncanny valley. Everyday stuff becomes alien.
Classic example. Two officers search him, making a list of his things through their tiny eyes. Imagine their confusion. His handkerchief, it's a great piece of coarse cloth, big enough to be a carpet for their main throne room.
His snuff box.
A huge silver chest. The dust makes the searchers sneeze like this monstrous cloud to them.
And his watch. That's the best bit.
Isn't it? They describe it as this great silver chain with a wonderful kind of engine at the bottom, a globe, half silver, half see-through metal. And they call it his oracle, his god.
Because of the ticking.
Yeah. They think he seldom did anything without consulting it, because of the constant noise, which to them sounds like a watermill. Powerful, mysterious, maybe even scary.
It's brilliant. Taking something totally mundane, changing the scale, and making it seem mystical, alien.
It really shows how differently we interpret things based on our frame of reference. Makes common objects uncannily strange.
And the politics, the courtly games are just hilarious, but also deeply cynical. How do you get ahead in Lilliput?
Not by debating policy, no. Candidates for high office, like Flimnap the treasurer or Ruldressel the secretary, they do rope dancing.
Rope dancing, seriously.
With a slender white thread, whoever jumps the highest succeeds in the office. Even ministers have to show they can still do it. And apparently fatal accidents are common. People break limbs. Flimnap himself nearly broke his neck once.
That's insane.
Then there's the other game, leaping and creeping under a stick held by the emperor. You get rewarded with threads, purple, yellow, white, green, which you wear as belts. Another totally trivial way to win political favor.
It's not just funny, though, is it? It feels like Swift is making a point about our own systems.
Absolutely. It's this profound look at the uncanny valley of human ambition. The familiar drive for power becomes grotesquely alien when you see the grand rituals are literally jumping through hoops. It makes you look sideways at the absurdities we accept in our own hierarchies.
Yeah, it really does. It exposes how precarious, how random political success can be. He's definitely mocking the favoritism and weird tests of loyalty in British politics back then.
No doubt. And Gulliver, who's kind of enjoying being the big guy in Lilliput, he even comes up with his own show for the emperor. A military drill.
What does he do?
Uses some sticks and his handkerchief to make a stage. Then a troop of 24 tiny horsemen perform mock battles on it, showing off their discipline. The emperor loves it. Makes him do it again for the empress.
So Gulliver's playing along, enjoying his power.
Yeah, they're enjoying the show. Neither side seems aware, maybe, of the darker critiques Swift is weaving in underneath it all.
And then the satire gets even sharper, right? With the political factions and wars. These are clearly jabs at real-world English politics.
Oh, unmistakably. First, you've got the high heels versus the low heels, the Tramixan and the Slamsan.
Based purely on shoe heels.
Yep, that's the only difference between the parties. But the hatred runs so deep, they will neither eat nor drink nor talk with each other. The emperor prefers low heels, but the heir apparently hobbles, suggesting he secretly leans towards high heels.
It's a direct, hilarious dig at trivial political divides, isn't it? Like the Whigs and Tories back then.
Exactly. How tiny ideological points can create these huge social gulfs. The uncanny part is realizing how easily our own societies fall into those kinds of petty but really entrenched splits.
But the really killer satire is the egg thing. The big Indians versus the little Indians.
Oh yeah, this is devastating. It's all about a war that's lasted 36 moons. That's years, I think, over the primitive way of breaking eggs.
Whether you crack it at the big end or the little end.
Exactly. This tiny difference has caused 6 rebellions, cost 2 emperors their lives or crowns. 11,000 people have died rather than comply with breaking eggs at the smaller end.
11,000. Over eggs.
And Blefuscu, the rival empire across the water, keeps stirring up trouble. Hundreds of books have been written debating the issue.
Swift is really sharpening his knife here. It's not just about eggs, is it?
Not at all. It's a brutal, thinly disguised critique of the religious wars that tore Europe apart for centuries. Catholics versus Protestants, fighting over points of doctrine that, from an outside view, might seem just as arbitrary as which end of an egg to crack.
That's where the uncanny feels really disturbing. Humanity's capacity for incredible violence over things that seem insignificant makes you look at our own history and feel both familiarity and this sort of horrifying strangeness.
Precisely. That senselessness, and Gulliver gets plopped right into the middle of this mess.
He ends up being a weapon for Lilliput, doesn't he?
He does. He comes up with this extraordinary stratagem to deal with the Blefuscu invasion fleet. He wades across the channel. It's only 6 feet deep at high tide for him, but a vast sea for them.
Puts on his glasses to protect his eyes from their arrows.
Which must have looked terrifying to them. Then he cuts the anchor cables of their warships and just tows 50 of their biggest ships back to Lilliput, like toys.
He's like a one-man weapon of mass destruction, ends their war in an afternoon.
But the emperor, like so many rulers, gets greedy. He doesn't just want peace. He wants to conquer Blefuscu completely, force them all to break their eggs at the little end, make himself the sole monarch of the whole world.
And Gulliver pushes back.
He does. This is where he takes that moral stand. He protests, says, "I would never be an instrument of bringing a free and brave people into slavery."
Which sounds noble to us.
Yeah, ethically sound from our perspective. But in the Lilliputian court, that makes him a problem, a threat. It reviews the cruelty lurking behind their seemingly organized, benevolent power.
And things start to go wrong for him after that.
Pretty quickly. Swift throws in these incidents that show how petty and vengeful absolute power can be. First, there's a fire in the palace, started by a maid of honor reading a romance novel in bed.
Okay.
Gulliver, thinking fast, puts out the fire, however, by urinating on it.
Seriously?
Yep. Very effective, saved the palace, but totally unconventional.
I bet the Empress wasn't thrilled.
Not exactly. She develops the greatest abhorrence for him and vows revenge because he, well, touched a royal person in such an unprincipled manner. He doesn't even get pardoned for saving the palace. Shows their weird, almost uncanny priorities.
So his enemies start plotting against him.
Yeah, the plot thickens, led by guys like Bolgolam, the admiral who never liked him, and Flimnap, the treasurer. They drop charges, serious ones. Treason for, the fire incident, refusing to hand over all his weapons earlier, helping Blefuscu make peace, planning a trip there.
What's the proposed punishment?
It's chillingly meticulous. They debate starving him to death, poisoning him slowly, or blinding him with poisoned arrows while he lay on the ground.
Blinding him? Why?
So he'd still be a spectacle, something they could show off, but no longer a physical threat. Then Roll Dressel, the secretary who sometimes seemed friendly, suggests a lenient alternative.
Which is?
Just putting out his eyes. A mercy, apparently, to diminish him, not destroy him. It's this really disturbing, uncanny view of justice, where calculated cruelty is presented as leniency.
Faced with that kind of mercy, I guess he decides to run for it.
He does. He remembers he swore an oath to the emperor, but as he says, he was hurried on by the precipitancy of youth. Kind of funny coming from him, and he makes a break for Blefuscu. Uses one of the captured warships and his bed coverlet.
How is he received in Blefuscu?
Initially pretty well. After all, he did sort of help end the war for them, too.
And he finds a way out.
His resourcefulness kicks in again, even in escape mode. It contrasts sharply with Lilliput's petty cruelty. He spots an overturned boat out at sea, half a league off.
His ticket home.
Potentially. It becomes his escape plan. He asks the Blefuscu emperor for help. Timber for oars, tallow for greasing the boat. He even loads it up with provisions, carcasses of 100 oxen, 300 sheep.
And live animals.
Yeah, 6 cows, 2 bulls, ewes, lambs. He wants to take them back to England to propagate the breed. Always practical, always thinking scientifically, even now, bringing back useful stuff.
But Lilliput doesn't give up easily.
No, the Lilliputian emperor sends a message demanding Gulliver be sent back, tied up, ready for blinding.
Does Blefuscu agree?
To their credit, no. The Blefuscu emperor refuses, saying he owes Gulliver for helping make peace. So Gulliver gets away.
A bittersweet farewell, then.
Yeah. The Blefuscu emperor gives him money 50 purses, 200 tiny gold coins called sprugs in each in his picture. But Gulliver isn't allowed to take any Lilliputians with him, even if they wanted to come. That would be seen as betraying Lilliput.
So he sets sail alone, leaving the world where he was a god.
And heading towards his next adventure, where the scale and the uncanny feeling are about to get flipped completely.
And what a flip it is. Brobdingnag. He leaves England again on a ship called the Adventure, June 1702. Another storm, naturally,
Of course.
blows them way off course, 500 leagues east, somewhere totally uncharted. And his first sight of this new land, the scale is just staggering.
How big are we talking?
Grass 20 feet high, corn stalks 40 feet high, hedges 120 feet. The steps on a stile are 6 feet high. The whole world is just monumental. Everything familiar is twisted into these overwhelming proportions.
Wow.
And then he sees one of the inhabitants, a huge creature, a man wading in the sea after their boat. He's as tall as an ordinary spire steeple, takes 10 yards at every stride.
10 yards. Like a giant from a fairy tale, but real.
The terror Gulliver feels is immense, almost paralyzing, especially when you remember he was the man mountain back in Lilliput.
Total role reversal.
Exactly. And this is where the uncanny valley hits really hard, I think. He's looking at his own species. Human form, but they're monstrously huge, horrifying and alien, even though they're undeniably human.
The familiar made monstrous.
Yeah.
Deeply unsettling.
Yeah. And Gulliver himself reflects on it. He says, "Nothing is great or little otherwise than by comparison." He feels actual despair at being so inconsiderable here after being a prodigy in Lilliput.
His fear of just being a snack, a morsel, these giants must be intense.
Palpable. And the uncanny feeling is stronger because it is humanity, his own kind, just rendered grotesque by scale. Their voices boom like thunder. Their footsteps shake the earth. Every little human detail we ignore is magnified horribly. Blemishes, pores, stubble, things that seem fine on us look coarse and ugly on them.
So his capture must be pretty humbling.
Brutal reversal. A reaper just picks him up between his forefinger and thumb, holds him 60 feet off the ground.
60 feet.
Gulliver's now the one making desperate, pleading gestures, begging for mercy. The farmer is confused at first, but then sees him as a curiosity. Amazed he can speak articulate words.
What about Gulliver's gold? Useful.
Totally useless. A complete mystery to them. Shows how even money's value is totally relative to scale and context. Worthless trinkets here.
But then he meets Glumdalclitch. She's a bit different.
Ah, yes, Glumdalclitch. One of the most sympathetic characters, really. The farmer's daughter, 9 years old. She's not above 40 feet high. Tiny for them. Enormous for him.
She becomes his protector.
His caretaker, yeah. Teaches him their language. She names him Grildrig, means mannequin, or little fellow. He calls her Glumdalclitch, little nurse. She's really inventive, tries to make him comfortable, makes him a bed in her old baby cradle, puts it in a drawer, sews him clothes from their finest cloth.
Which still feels like sackcloth to him.
Exactly. It highlights the care she shows in a world that could just accidentally crush him.
But life isn't easy for him, even with her. The farmer sees pound signs, or whatever their currency is.
Right. The farmer quickly figures out Gulliver's a potential gold mine, starts exhibiting him for money, takes him to market towns, then eventually to the capital city, Lorbrulgrud.
That must have been rough, being treated like a freak show.
Awful. He describes being violently shaken in his travel box on journeys. The agitation was like the rising and falling of a ship in a great storm, but way more frequent. He's forced to perform 100 diverting tricks.
Like what?
Drinking from a thimble, fencing with his little sword, his hanger, using a straw like a spear, over and over until he's half dead with weariness and vexation. He's gone from being a god in Lilliput to being a novelty act, a pet, a prisoner, really.
And the dangers must be constant. Just everyday things become lethal.
Totally. He mentions a schoolboy aiming a hazelnut at his head. From his perspective, it's almost pumpkin-sized, could have infallibly knocked out my brains.
Wow.
A cat's purring sounds like a dozen stocking weavers at work. The cat itself is 3 times larger than an ox. Dogs are the size of 4 elephants.
Even babies are dangerous?
Yeah, the nurse's 1-year-old grabs him once, curious, and puts his head in its mouth. Rats climb his bed curtains, their tails are 2 yards long, just constant reminders of how vulnerable he is. The familiar home environment becomes truly uncanny in its potential danger.
But his fame spreads. He ends up at court.
Yeah, word gets to the queen. She hears about this unique little creature, buys him from the farmer for 1,000 pieces of gold, which is a fortune in their scale, showing how valuable a curiosity he is.
And he insists Glumdalclitch stays with him.
He does, always loyal to his little nurse. She's delighted, of course, to be at court. But even on this grand stage, Gulliver's main concern is his personal comfort in having her nearby.
How does the king react? Is he impressed?
Initially. Not really. It's quite telling, actually. Shows the limits of even smart people when faced with something truly outside their experience. The king first thinks Gulliver is a splackneck, that's some kind of animal or maybe just clockwork,
Yeah.
a toy.
Yeah. He's only surprised when he hears Gulliver speak rationally. Then the court scholars weigh in with their learned arguments.
What do they conclude?
They decide he cannot exist by regular laws of nature. He's too small to survive, they argue. Can't run fast enough, can't climb, can't dig burrows. They can't figure out how he eats. Must be snails and insects, they guess. They basically dismiss him as a lucis naturae.
A freak of nature.
Yeah, too small even to be considered a dwarf in their world. This is the uncanny hitting science. Their familiar laws of nature just don't account for him. He's an anomaly that breaks their understanding and maybe challenges our fixed ideas about what's possible or natural.
It's a fantastic flip, isn't it? And a sharp critique from Swift. Gulliver, the godlike figure in Lilliput, is now a scientific impossibility.
Totally. His living arrangements at court are comfy, but they reinforce his status as, well, bad.
Yeah.
They built him a special wooden room, 16 feet square, 12 feet high. Furniture screwed down so it doesn't get knocked over.
He eats with the royals.
Sort of. He has a tiny table set up next to the queen's elbow. But he finds her eating habits disgusting. She takes, at one mouthful, as much as a dozen English farmers could eat.
And he notices their imperfections.
Oh, yeah. He observes how even the smoothest and whitest skins look rough and coarse and ill-colored when magnified. Even his own skin. It's that uncanny valley of human imperfection seen up close. What seems beautiful or smooth normally becomes kind of grotesque when the scale changes. Like how his own face must have looked to the Lilliputians, full of holes and stubble.
And there's a dwarf at court who makes his life difficult.
Yeah, the malicious dwarf adds another layer of psychological discomfort. This dwarf is the smallest person ever known in Brobdingnag, but he's still nearly 30 feet tall. He becomes Gulliver's tormentor.
What does he do?
Things like dropping Gulliver into a big silver bowl of cream or wedging him inside a marrow bone. These aren't just physical threats. They're humiliations, designed to make Gulliver feel small, ridiculous, an uncomfortable reminder of how easily power dynamics slip.
And the insects are terrifying, too.
Truly, wasps are as large as partridges. Their stings are an inch-and-a-half long. Gulliver actually fights some off and keeps 4 stings as souvenirs. Shows his resilience, I guess.
Garden hazards, too.
Constant threat. Apples, near as large as a Bristol barrel falling, could kill him. Hailstones, 1,800 times as large as one in Europe. A kite tries to snatch him. He breaks his shin, tripping over a snail shell. Even a linnet, a small bird, is somewhat larger than an English swan and becomes this huge thing he tries to catch for Glumdalclitch. He's always at risk from a world not built for him. Everyday nature becomes deadly.
And all this leads up to the king's big critique of Europe, doesn't it? This really humbling moment for Gulliver.
And for us, the readers, by extension, Gulliver, full of national pride, tries to impress the king. He describes England in these glowing, self-important terms. Parliament, the noble peers, the wise commons, courts of justice, the military, the treasury.
Paints a rosy picture.
Completely. Celebrates England as the mistress of arts and arms, the scourge of France, the arbitress of Europe, the seat of virtue, piety, honor, and truth, the pride and envy of the world. He's really laying it on thick.
Trying to make his country sound grand.
But his whole frame of reference, soaked in European self-praise, is totally different from the king's. The king sees things with this clear, unvarnished view.
And this is where Swift really goes for the jugular, right? The satire gets brutal.
Absolutely. The king listens patiently while Gulliver paints this idealized picture. But then he starts asking these piercing questions, observations that just systematically pull apart Gulliver's puffed-up patriotism.
What kind of questions?
About the nobility. How are their minds and bodies actually trained? Are lords chosen for merit or through connections, bribes? Are clergy promoted for piety or politics? He's questioning the very basis of their supposed meritocracy.
And about ordinary people. Elections.
Yeah. Can rich strangers buy votes? Why do MPs put up with the trouble and expense if there's no salary? Is it so they can refund themselves later by selling out the public good? It's a direct shot at political corruption, the dodgy dealings in the British Parliament of the time.
He tackles the legal system, too.
Oh, yes. The time and cost of lawsuits. Lawyers arguing unjust cases just for money. Party politics influencing justice. Do judges write the laws they then get to interpret? He's basically asking, is your justice system actually just, or is it just a tool for the powerful?
And the government finances. War.
Doesn't hold back there either. Questions the huge gap between taxes collected and money spent, the real cost of wars, and he's baffled by the idea of a mercenary standing army in peacetime, in what's supposed to be a free country, professional soldiers living by killing. That blows his mind.
He even criticizes their social habits.
Yep, gambling leading to ruin, making nobles hang out with vile companions, wrecking fortunes and honor. Swift is clearly just laying bare all the moral rot and systemic corruption he saw in 18th century England.
And his view of European history.
Yeah.
It's pretty harsh, too.
Brutal. A truly humbling perspective for humanity. He calls it just a heap of conspiracies, rebellions, murders, massacres, revolutions, banishments. Basically, all the worst things that avarice, faction, hypocrisy, perfidiousness, cruelty, rage, madness, hatred, envy, lust, malice, and ambition could produce.
Wow. No sugarcoating there.
None at all. He strips away all the self-glorification, just reduces human history to this catalog of vices, makes our own past feel almost horribly familiar in its endless cycle of stupidity and destruction. It's the ultimate uncanny view, seeing ourselves stripped bare of all self-importance.
So the king's final judgment, it must be pretty damning.
It's the ultimate uncanny verdict, profound in its simplicity and severity. He takes Gulliver in his hand, strokes him gently, and gives this speech Gulliver says he'll never forget.
What does he say?
"My little friend Grildrig, you have made a most admirable panegyric upon your country." Then the hammer falls. "I cannot but conclude the bulk of your natives to be the most pernicious race of little odious vermin that nature ever suffered to crawl upon the surface of the earth."
Ouch. That's intense.
Deeply humbling for Gulliver. And for us. We're forced to see humanity through the eyes of this morally superior giant as tiny, destructive insects. A truly uncomfortable, uncanny reflection.
And just when you think Gulliver might have learned something, might feel a bit humbled, he does something incredibly tone-deaf.
Right. He makes this misguided attempt to get back in the king's good graces, to ingratiate myself farther into his majesty's favor.
Oh.
How? By offering the secret of gunpowder.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. He gives this detailed, almost excited description of how destructive it is. Blows up mountains, fires cannonballs that destroy armies, smashes walls, sinks ships, tears up streets, rips people apart.
And he thinks this is a good thing, a valuable gift.
He genuinely seems to. He even points out how cheap and common it is in Europe. Sees it as a great advantage. It just shows how deeply ingrained his own cultural acceptance of violence is. He can't see it from the outside.
How does the king react?
The exact opposite of what Gulliver expects, which highlights the huge moral gap between them. The king is struck with horror. He's amazed how so impotent and groveling an insect as I could entertain such inhuman ideas and in so familiar a manner.
He tells him to shut up about it.
Commands him never to mention any more this secret. Says he'd rather lose half his kingdom than know about such a destructive force. Gulliver sees technological destruction as power, as progress. The king sees it as pure evil, contrived by some evil genius enemy to mankind. This moment makes Gulliver's own human viewpoint seem not just flawed, but uncannily barbaric.
So the Brobdingnagians operate on totally different principles. They're learning, their laws.
Very different from Europe's. Their learning is focused on practical things. Morality, history, poetry, and maths, only as it applies to what may be useful in life, like improving farming or mechanics. They don't get ideas, entities, abstractions, and transcendentals. Swift implies those are often pointless, maybe even harmful intellectual games.
And their laws.
Short, simple, plain language. Writing commentary on the laws is a capital crime because they believe laws should only have one clear meaning. They're not mercurial enough to discover above one interpretation. This simple, practical approach is set against Europe's complex, tangled, often corrupt legal and intellectual world, which the king sees as just unnecessary, dangerous, and self-defeating.
So Gulliver's a favorite at court. The king is benevolent, even if critical.
Yeah.
But he still wants out.
Yeah, despite everything, he still longed for liberty. He felt his situation, being basically a pet, ill became the dignity of humankind. He was a curiosity, a talking point, but never free, never equal.
How does he escape? Is it planned?
No. It's as random and dramatic as his arrival. Pure accident. He's being carried in his travel box near the coast. A page puts the box down carelessly. An eagle swoops down and snatches the box.
Wow.
Then other eagles attack the first one, and in the fight, the box gets dropped from a huge height, right into the sea. A terrifying moment of total helplessness for Gulliver inside.
Does the box sink?
Amazingly, no. It floats, thanks to some iron plates on it, despite being damaged. Gulliver's trapped inside, bobbing on the ocean. He manages to stick a handkerchief on a stick out of a hole as a distress signal.
And someone finds him.
Yeah, an English ship spots the floating box. But here's where that lasting, uncanny effect really shows up, the psychological impact of his journey.
How so?
The Vanschillers are obviously amazed to find him. But Gulliver, he's equally confounded at the sight of so many pygmies.
He sees them as tiny.
Completely. He's forgotten their normal scale. He thinks they're mad when they talk wildly because their voices sound so small. His own species, once familiar, now looks alien and miniature to him.
His mind has been totally recalibrated by living among giants.
Exactly. His own kind now seemed diminutive, strange, almost unreal. The captain of the ship, Captain Wilcox, is naturally pretty skeptical about Gulliver's story. Who wouldn't be?
How does Gulliver prove it?
He shows off his small collection of rarities. The souvenirs from Brobdingnag, a comb he made from the king's beard stubble, needles and pins that are a foot to half a yard long, 4 wasp stings like joiner's tacks, some of the queen's hair combings, a gold ring the queen gave him. He wore it like a collar. His trousers made from a mouse's skin.
Mouse skin trousers.
And a footman's tooth, which is a foot long and 4 inches in diameter.
Yeah.
These bizarre but tangible objects finally convince the captain, concrete proof of his fantastical, uncanny experiences.
But the disorientation sticks with him, even after rescue.
Profoundly. Shows the deep psychological scars. He speaks way too loudly, hears other people's voices as whispers still adjusted to the giant world. He tells Captain he could never endure to look in a glass in Brobdingnag because seeing his own magnified flaws gave him so despicable a conceit of myself.
I mean, even back in England.
The feeling persists. He sees normal dishes as tiny, like a silver 3p. A leg of pork looks like hardly a mouthful. A cup seems like a nutshell. His internal sense of scale is so messed up that his own world now feels alien, weirdly small, almost fake. He's trapped in his own personal uncanny valley, an outsider even when he's finally home.
So, what do we take away from all this? Gulliver's Journey, it's clearly way more than just an adventure story. It's this deep dive into how radically perspective shapes everything our reality, how we see ourselves, how we judge others.
Absolutely. It forces us to confront that weird, uncanny feeling when something familiar becomes disturbingly strange.
Right.
And Gulliver's constant shifts in scale, they make us, the readers, really question what great or little even means. Are our own political fights over, seemingly tiny differences, the high heels or the egg breaking, are they any less absurd than Lilliput's?
Probably not when you put it like that.
And is our human grandeur really all that impressive when you see through the eyes of the Brobdingnagian king, who looks at our history, our wars, our corruption, our clever weapons, and just sees pernicious vermin?
It's a really uncomfortable, uncanny mirror Swift holds up to us.
Definitely.
And here's what gets really interesting, I think. Gulliver himself ends up being this uncanny figure. To the Lilliputians, he's this walking mountain, a kind of god with a weird, ticking oracle watch. To the Brobdingnagians, he's just an insect, a party trick, but one capable of suggesting truly horrific, world-ending violence.
Yeah, that gunpowder moment is chilling.
And then, when he finally gets home, his own familiar world feels weird, almost alien, because his internal sense of scale is just broken. He sees his own people as pygmies. He can't even look at himself without feeling that despicable conceit. He's just permanently out of sync with whatever world he's in.
Which raises a really important question for us, doesn't it? How much of our own perception of ourselves, of our society, is just shaped by the frame of reference we happen to be stuck in? And what might we discover? What uncomfortable truths could we face if we were somehow forced to see everything from a totally different, maybe deeply unsettling angle? Swift really challenges whether our normal is just, a comfortable illusion we've built.
Exactly. Gulliver's Travels pushes us way out of our comfort zone, makes us feel that psychological, even moral impact of being fundamentally out of scale. It's like a literary trip right into the uncanny valley itself.
Reminds us that the familiar can turn strange in an instant.
It does. It reminds us that our normal is completely relative. And maybe getting a little uncomfortable, questioning our own perceptions, is actually the way to a deeper understanding, even if that understanding is, well, a bit more unsettling.
Yeah, maybe true understanding often starts with that little flicker of unease, that moment when the familiar suddenly feels just a little bit off.
Well, that's all the time we have for the Uncanny Valley podcast today. Thanks for joining us on this pretty extraordinary journey through perception and scale. Until next time, keep exploring those hidden corners where the familiar starts to look strange.